Walfredo, thank you so much for joining us. I know here at the PASIC conference, you're really busy catching everybody else as well as doing your own clinic that you did. That was wonderful. And it's always great to see someone like yourself who has been around a long time. And to me, that simply means has a lot to say. And from the Cuban experience to coming here in the United States, and for me, and I think most people who know you, you are the bridge of that music as a percussionist and drummer. And I know we had this experience in Havana during the KoSA workshop. That was that was wonderful. Do you want to talk about like your personal voyage of that, how you felt, and what you want to share with somebody, just to share about knowledge about what happened, what was about?
Well, first of all, being born in Cuba is a land of rhythms and lots and lots and lots of percussion. A lifetime, and you won't learn everything. There's so much to learn in Cuban percussion. So when I moved to the United States at a very early age, I was in 1941. My father, came. He wanted to try to find the gold pot. Those were the days of the mambo, the conga, the cha-cha-cha later on. But I always had my Cuban relationship, because we would go in summer to Havana, my mother and I. So it was like 3 months in Cuba and 6 months in New York, where I went to school, and I actually grew up. Since I became a musician, I started playing at 15 years old in New York City. My first show was Billy Daniels, a great singer, and I had that New York experience a little bit, because later on, like in 1951, my dad and my mother decided to move back to Cuba. So that was a learning experience. I was 19 then, and I started, messing around with the drum set. I had seen Buddy, I had seen Gene, I had seen Max, and all the great American drummers. And when I got down there wasn't that much influence. The only thing was what we heard on recordings, like Chico Farrell, Bebo, Guillermo Barreto. They all have records, but I had seen it personally, so it was very important. And I started studying Cuban music, recording, doing the cargas, jam sessions, cachao. That was the beginning in the late 40s and early 50s. But there was always an American connection. We were listening to the greats, and then the greats were listening to Cuban percussion. And one of the things that really happened in the 50s was the introduction of Chano Pozo with Dizzy Gillespie, and the introduction of the conga drum. And I remember in high school, when I was in high school in New York, all the kids were like going nuts with this little barrel that made such an incredible impression on American jazz. And it wasn't that complicated Cuban rhythms. It was just like a boom boom ba, boom boom ba, boom boom ba. What we call tumbao, and everybody was doing it. So that even then later on, the drummers would do it on the drum set. So that was a focal point on Cuban rhythms, starting to get into jazz. And I find that the young generation in Cuba is the same thing now. They listen to great American drummers like Vinny and Thomas Pridgeon and Weckl, and they go nuts. But they always put their Cuban feel. There's a thing about, and the reality is that there is Cuban the drum set playing, and it differs. There's a little extra sauce that you put in there. I went to a clinic And the drummer started out by doing a Steve Gadd pattern. So he does a Steve Gadd pattern, and I go, wow, now they're talking about Steve Gadd here. Yeah, okay, so Steve. And then he goes into little by little, he started putting some incredible Cuban rhythms, basically taking from Cuban drums like the bata, the bata drums, the arar drums, the abacua rhythms, all the rhythms that we got, and they introduced them into the drum set, and that's what I wanted when I did that in 1952. That association, and actually is world music, because you could do that without being Cuban drum. They could be Brazilian, they could be from Chile, they could be from anything. But which there's jazz there too, the same thing, the same kind of thing. So I'm very proud of that. The young generation has kept going and going and going, inventing, and that's what drummers are all about, inventing things, not being satisfied with one rhythm. We want to go on and on and on and on.
And it's interesting. I mean, you said it, knowing the tradition, and we're always talking about you can't move forward unless you go backwards, and the further back you go, the more forward you're going to go, in the same light that you're saying.
That's right.
And whether it's jazz drumming here in America or classical percussion, is the same thing. The more you go back, the more you discover how much forward you can get. And the Cubans certainly have that down. I noticed, I've been going there for 12 years, and we've been doing these KoSA workshops for the 12 years. So I am seeing, and I'm also studying in the different areas. They have all their different cultures. Now we're talking about popular music. We haven't talked about the traditional, because they themselves go out and study the traditional music before they come back and are able to do anything. You listen to people like Changuito or Piloto. I mean, they have a reach into the past that is like, is so deep that it's really interesting.
It is. It's incredible, and if you like you're saying going back, well, you go back and you see these in classical music, the composers that they were already experimenting with batas and the different drumming, and there is a lot of Cuban classical music that is with folklore, and should be heard, and we don't hear it enough. So and you talk. I was at the museum, PASIC, the museum down the street, and I saw the drum set of Roy C. Knapp. That he was in Chicago, an incredible teacher, everything, right? This guy had a set of timbales on the drum, and the drums are there. A set of old timbales. I'm going and looking at them and going, wow. They could be Cuban timbales, and he has two double pedal, two single pedals on the bass drum. So he was already experimenting with the double pedal, the timbal sound, because they're sounds. They sound different. When you put the folklore drum, a conga, a tumba, it doesn't sound like a tom-tom. That's where I come in. You want to hear the jazz set or the American side, but you want to hear now, what do they play down there? And there are many different drums and playing. So you start combining, and there's a lot of good people combining today. Believe me, it's amazing. So I'm glad about that.
And it's, as you say, you mentioned Roy Knapp, and you just it brought back a memory. When I was a kid, I went to my very first drum camp. I actually met Roy Knapp.
Well, you met him. Wow.
I was in a classroom with Gary Burton, and Roy Knapp walked into the room. It was in Madison at a Ludwig Percussion Symposium at the time. And Roy Knapp came in the room, and he was talking about this very idea that you're reaching out colors, you're reaching out way beyond what you know. And they were doing the silent movies, and they were doing all of that stuff in those days. So they knew, and he was a trained musician, of course, and a very good one. And there are things, as you go back, it's like Louis Bellson playing his double bass drums.
Right.
Way
Ed
back.
Shaughnessy,
Ed Shaughnessy, way back. These are not new ideas. But they experimented.
They experiment.
They experimented and reached out. and as I said, you go back, and then you can move forward in any culture.
Yeah.
And I mean, now that you see you're back in Cuba with us this year at the KoSA Cuba workshop, and you saw where it is today, and you remember that day when we did that workshop, Changuito's in the room, like everybody is in the room, and we said, here's the guy in the 50s was doing that hybrid playing, reaching out and experimenting, and today there are people like Roberto Smith, El Capitan, doing that, which is way beyond the imagination.
Really ridiculous.
What was your first impression when you saw Roberto El Capitan play?
Well, he was incredible. He respected me a lot, and the first 50 minutes he was talking about me. Very respectful, maestro. So he's a fine guy, and he has taken the percussion level of doing everything. I mean, everything by himself, playing bongo and conga at the same time, but not simple, complicated. He has an incredible pair of hands, and that makes it very, very good. And then by playing things with his left foot that are to be played with hands, he plays it with the feet. He'll do the clave, he'll do the cacara with a plate. He has a plate there, chick, 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 But the guys are.
And also his he's the one who invented the fusheki that LP
right.
has out.
He gave me one. I'm practicing.
Is that right? When he first came out with that, even the Cubans, I remember being there, and when he was introducing this years ago, that was maybe 4 years ago, when he introduced the maracas being played with the foot and playing the rhythm, not just a simple rhythm, but playing da 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 while he's doing the rest
the eight
and
notes
improvising.
Very clear. 8 notes.
Absolutely brilliant, yes.
Yeah.
And and he has many other inventions, by the way, that he hasn't brought out yet.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that the players over there certainly went back, and they know their tradition, and then they come forward, and they take the influence even from America or any great drummer here and take it there, and then turn it around and do something else with it.
Everything is in Cuba, and I know a lot of countries too. Whether you say I'm a drummer, how did you start? Well, in the kitchen, my mother's pots and things. Everyone has that kind of story. Sticks, this, that. And your father would say, "Shut up," and. But we are very nervous people. A lot of times, I would play in my mother's furniture. Or my mother's cajon, and you don't have a cajon, and you're poor. Well, you use anything, a table, or all kinds of sounds. Cans. The crackers used to come in cans, take them out, and the top was a cymbal. So we are experimental, and that's beautiful. And I think that's something in every drummer in all parts of the world.
Well, it is. We always say it's the universal language, and you go anywhere in the world and you just pick up anything, and everybody will understand exactly what you're saying. Yeah. That's the language.
Well, am I going to see you in KoSA 2014?
Yes. Well, this year the dates are March.
When is that?
March 9 to 16 in Havana. So if you want to join us again, it's always a pleasure.
You have to go to that. It's amazing. It's amazing. And the talent. I saw this little 8-year-old girl at the Palace of the Rumba. And she came up, she was like about that size, and I played the bongos. But couldn't put it. They were so big that she couldn't handle it. So she put them here, 8 years old. Amazing. And there's school kids, timbales, drum set players that are awesome. Young girls. There's one that looks like Terry Lynn Carrington.
Oh, yes.
It's exactly like her. And I told her, I said, you look like Terry Lynn. And she was like, oh my God, that's and when I heard her play, wow.
Oh no, they're studied and it's well encouraged over there. So that's and everybody knows, and that's really really interesting. And I like you say, there's a major competition, national competition, during our festival, during our workshop at the Fiesta del Tambor in Havana Rhythm and Dance Festival. I saw this kid who's 8 years old playing bata. They had to put him on a stead to reach the drums.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, we have to keep going. Never stop. Never stop. That's, the other night over here, I was in Minnesota before I came here, and the home I was staying in, we started hearing Buddy Rich, and you hear Buddy, and you see everything you want is there. You analyze him, and he went to Cuba in '51, and Buddy was with Tommy Dorsey's band, and they played at the Sans Souci nightclub, but he was very taken in with the conga drums and wanted to play it, but he didn't have the hands, so he wanted to play the clave, and then he was like couldn't get the clave, so he was mad. Buddy was mad. Oh my God! But you hear him play, and you hear the clave.
It's funny. He totally soaked it in, and there's a story. I mean, isn't that the story where Guillermo Barreto, Piloto's uncle, subbed in for Buddy because he was ill or something one night?
Yeah. And Tommy, Guillermo was playing in the back. They did the theme song, and they went into about 3 tunes. And Tommy Dorsey didn't know that it wasn't Buddy until he turned around and saw Guillermo Barreto just poof.
Wow. So he didn't know that it was Guillermo Barreto playing instead of Buddy.
About 3 or 4 tunes. They turned around and they said, he doesn't look like Buddy.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you who don't know, Guillermo Barreto, he's passed on now, and the festival is actually dedicated to him. But he was Giraldo Piloto, the great drummer, present drummer, his uncle, who was a genius orchestrator, a genius drummer. He was amazing.
Yeah, all that family all the Valdeses are incredible. Chucho, Bebo was a very good friend of mine, Bebo Valdez. And I worked with him a lot in Cuba. You know what's funny about Cuba in those days? I was playing at a theater, a show, and some guy from way up there said to me when I started playing the drum set, like a mambo, a fast mambo, and he said, "Hey, that's not Cuban music, it's Chinese." Because of the symbol, it wasn't. You didn't hear that, and many times in those days. Okay, this is how things have changed. In those days, the classical conductor Gonzalo Roy was conducting, and he told me, "What are you playing?" I was playing brushes on the snare drum. I wanted to imitate the sound of the maraca, and he stopped the band and said to me, that is not Cuban music. Cuban music does not have drum set. So I had to pick up the maracas and put, so that goes to tell you the evolution. The young generation, Horacio Hernandez, Daphne Prieto, you have incredible musicians, not only drummers, musicians, because they study piano, harmony, solfeggio. That's one good thing that I like about the young people in Cuba. They could arrange. They could do anything.
No, that shows the importance of being a musician. And yes, we're worried about the instrument and bringing it, but ultimately you have to play music. You have to know what music does.
Yeah. Well, Daphne, I love Daphne Prieto from Santa Clara. Well, you know all those guys, right? At Peje with Chucho Valdez.
Yes.
The great Chucho Valdez trio. It's amazing. They're just... And the thing is, you could turn to jazz, and then you could turn to, what are you going to call it, Afro-Cuban or Afro-Latino or Afro whatever, But that knowledge of playing that and knowing how to play it,
Yeah.
So... But believe me, the influence of jazz and American drummers of all times have always been part of Cuba, always.
And that's an interesting thing because there's this back and forth. I mean, even in the old days, New Orleans, there's a very strong connection
Right.
with Havana, and that has always evolved. So there's a back and forth, and they are totally aware of what's going on here. They hear. So everybody's influencing each other. So you have this back and forth evolution. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I want to go to back and see some more and learn. Changuito, Enrique Pla, Iraquere, the group orchestra Iraquere, and so much talent, you know, so much talent. So it's good if you're studying drums or percussion. It's good to make a trip. Just do it.
Oh,
You
yes.
know.
And of course, I invite you to join us at KoSA, KoSAmusic.com. Walfredo, I want to thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us today. I really appreciate it. To be
Same here.
continued.
It's a pleasure.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.